Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Misery. Chapter 3. He took the pony trap, driving under an eerie, not quite dark sky when three porters moon ducked relentlessly in and out between Riso cloud. He had paused to throw in the first thing downstairs hall closet with came in hand. This turned out to be the dark maroon smoking jacket. The tails blew out behind him as he whipped Mary on. The elderly mare did not like the speed upon which he was insisting. Jeffrey did not like deepening the pain in his shoulder and side. The pain of neither could be held. Scratching sounds that she was still alive down there, trying to work her way back to the land of the living. This by itself would not have put him in the state of near terror, but he remembered coming to Calthorpe Manor the day after Misery's death. He and Ian looked at each other, and then Ian had tried to smile, although his eyes were gem-like with unshed tears. It would somehow seem easier, Ian said, if she looked more than dead. I don't know how that smelled. Bosh, Jeffrey had said, trying to smile. The Undertaker doubtless exercised all his wit, and Undertaker, Ian nearly screamed. And for the first time, Jeffrey had understood the friend was tottering on the brink of madness. Undertaker, ghoul, I've had no Undertaker, and I will have no Undertaker to come in and rouge my darling and paint her like a doll. Ian, my dear fellow, really you mustn't. Jeffrey had made as if clap on Ian's shoulder and somehow had turned into an embrace. Two men wept in each other's arms were like tired children. On some other room, Misery's child, a boy now almost a day old and still unnamed, awoke and began to cry. Mrs. Rummage, whose own kindly heart was broken, began to sing, and in a cradle song in a voice cracked and full of tears. At the time, deeply afraid for Ian's sanity, he had been less concerned with what Ian said than how he said it. Only now he whipped Mary ever faster toward little Dunthorpe in spite of his own deepening pain. Did the words come back, haunting in light of Coulter's tale? It looked more dead. Sheila looked more dead. Old chap. Nor was that all. Late that afternoon, as the first of the village people began wending their way up to the Calthorpe to pay their respect near the grieving loon, Shinebone had returned. He had looked tired, not very well himself, nor was this surprising in a man who claimed to have shaken hands with Wellington, the Iron Duke himself, when he, Shinebone, not Wellington, had been a boy. Jeffrey had taught the Wellington story was probably an exaggeration, but old Shinny, as he and Ian had called him, as boys, had seen Jeffrey through all his childhood illnesses, and Shinny had seemed a very old man to him even then, always granting the eye of childhood, which tends to see anyone over the age of 25 as elderly. He thought Shinny must be all of 75 now. He was old. He had a hectic, terrible last 24 hours. It might not an old, tired man, but a mistake, a terrible, unspeakable mistake. It was, though, more than any other had which sent him out in this cold, windy night under a moon which shuddered uncertainly between the clouds. Could he have made such a mistake? Part of him, a craven, cowardly part, which would rather risk losing Misery forever than look upon the inevitable result of such a mistake, denied it. But when Shinny came in, Jeffrey had been sitting by Ian, who was remembering in a broken, scarcely coherent way about he and Ian rescued Misery from the palace dungeons of the mad French Viscount Leroux, how much they escaped in a wagon load of hay, and how Misery distracted one of the Viscount's guards at a critical moment by slipping one gorgeously unclad leg out of the way and waving it delicately. Jeffrey had been climbing in his own memories of the adventure, wholly in the grip of his grief by then, and then he cursed the grief now because to him, and to Ian as well, I suppose, Shinny had barely been there. Hadn't Shinny always seemed distant, strained, preoccupied? Was it only weariness, or had been something else, some suspicion? No, surely not, his mind protested uneasily. The pony trap was flying up Carthorpe Hills. The manor itself was dark, but good. There was a single light on in Miss Ramage's cottage. Hot Mary, he cried, wincing. Not much further, girl, and you can see it rest a bit. Surely not what you're thinking. But Shinny's exclamation of Jeffrey's broken ribs had sprained shoulders had seemed perfectly perfunctory, and he had barely spoken a word to Ian in spite of the man's grief and frequent incoherent cries. No, after a visit which now seemed longer than the most minimal sort of convention would demand, Shinny had asked, "Is she?" "Yes, in the parlor," Ian had managed. "My poor darling lies in the parlor. Kiss her for me, Shinny, and tell her I'll be with her soon." Ian had burst into tears again, and after some half word of the condolence, Shinny had passed in the parlor. It now seemed Jeffrey that the old sawbones had been there a rather long time. Or perhaps there was only faulty collection. But when he came out, he had been almost looking cheerful, so there was nothing faulty about the recollection. Jeffrey felt certain the expression was out of place in the room of grief and tears, a room where Mrs. Ramage had already been hung the black funerary curtains. Jeffrey had followed the old doctor out and spoken hesitantly in the kitchen. He hoped, he said, that the doctor would prescribe a sleeping powder to Ian, who really did seem quite ill. Shinny had seemed completely distracted. "However, it's not a bit like Mrs. Evelyn Hyde," he said. "I have satisfied myself of that." And he had returned to his cliche without so much as a response to Jeffrey's question. Jeffrey went black inside, already forgetting the doctor's already chalking Shinny's equally odd behavior of age, weariness, and his sort of grief. His own thought had turned to Ian again, and he determined that with no weeping powder forthcoming, he would only have to pour whiskey down Ian's throat until the poor fellow passed out, forgetting, dismissing, until now. "It's not a bit like Miss Evelyn Hyde. I've satisfied myself of that." Of what? Jeffrey did not know, but he intended to find out, no matter what the cost his sanity might be, and he recognized that cost might be high. Okay, chapter 4. Mrs. Ramage was still up when Jeffrey began to hammer on the cottage door, although it seemed already 2 hours past her normal bedtime. Since Misery had passed away, Mrs. Ramage found herself putting in her bedtime further and further back. It could not be put into a restless tossing and turning. She could not at least postpone the moment which she had begun. Although she was the most level-headed and practical of the women, the sudden outburst of knocking started a little scream from her, and she scalded herself with the hot milk she had always been pouring from the cup. Lately she had always been on the edge, always on the verge of a scream. It was not grief, this feeling, although she was not nearly overwhelmed with grief. This was a strange, thundering feeling that she could not even remember having before. It seemed to her that her thoughts, better left unrecognized, were circling around her, just before the grasp of her rarely bitterly in mind. "Who knocks at 10?" she cried. "Whoever it is, I thank you not for the burn I've given myself." It's Jeffrey, Mrs. Ramage." "Jeffrey Oliverton, open the door for God's sake." Mrs. Ramage's mouth opened. She was halfway to the door, but she remembered she was in her nightgown and cap. She had never heard Jeffrey sound so, and would not have believed it if someone had told her. If this was a man gnawing with a heart stouter than her beloved, my lord, that it was Jeffrey. Yet his voice trembled of the voice of women on the verge of hysterics. "A minute, Mr. Jeffrey, I'm half unclad." "Devil take it!" Jeffrey cried. "I don't care if you're dark," cursed Mrs. Ramage. "Open the door. Open the name of Jesus." She stood only a second, and then she went to the door, unbarred it, and threw it open. Jeffrey's look did more than stun her, and again she heard the dim thunder of black thoughts somewhere back in her head. Jeffrey stood on the threshold of the housekeeper's cottage in an odd slanting posture, as if his spine had been warped out by long years of carrying a peddler's desk. His right hand was pressed against his left arm and left side. His hair was in a tangle. His dark brown hair burned out of his white face. His dress was remarkable as one careful. Dandified, some would have said, some clothing, as Jeffrey Alberton usually was. He worn old smoking hatchet with the belt askew, an open throat white shirt, and a pair of rough serge pants that would look more home upon the legs of an itinerant gardener rather upon those of the richest man in Little Dunthorpe. Oh, his feet were a pair of threadbare slippers. Mrs. Ramage, hardly dressed for the court ball herself in her long white nightgown and muskrat's nightcap with the untied curling ribbons hanging around her face like the fridge in a lamp shade, stared at him with mounting concern. He had re-injured his ribs. He had broken after riding after the doctor 3 nights ago. That was obvious, but it wasn't just pain that made his eyes blaze from his whitened face like that. It was terror, barely held back in check. Mr. Jeffrey, what? No questions, he said hoarsely. No, not now, until you answer one of my own. What question? She was badly frightened now, her left hand clenched into a tight that was just above her munified bosom. Does the name Miss Evelyn Hyde mean anything to you? And suddenly she knew the reason for her terrible thundery feeling that had been inside her every Saturday since some part of her mind must have already had this gruesome thought and suppressed it. For she had no explanation at all, only the name of the unfortunate Miss Charlotte Evelyn Hyde, late of Storping on Firkill. The village was to the east of Dunthorpe, with submission to bring a screaming tearing from her. Oh, my saints! Oh, my dear Jesus! Has she been buried alive? Has she been buried alive? Has my darling Misery been buried alive? And now Geoffrey could even begin to answer. It was tough old Mrs. Ramage's turn to do something she had never done before that night and would never do again. She fainted dead away. And I'm going to stop right there. Thanks for listening.